In the quaint, suburban enclave of Bravelo, life unfolded with a predictable tranquility. Days passed with a serene regularity, each hour marked by the rhythmic routines of this gated community's residents. The neatly trimmed lawns and perfectly aligned hedges spoke of an unspoken competition for the tidiest house, and the gentle hum of sprinklers was a familiar accompaniment to the birds' morning songs. We, the inhabitants, lived under a self-imposed order, bound by bylaws that were as much a part of our lives as the rising and setting sun. These rules were rarely questioned. They were simply the framework of our existence. Among these bylaws was a peculiar one, often whispered about, but never openly discussed, the rule forbidding laughter after dark. It was a curious decree, almost quaint in its antiquity, yet no one dared to flout it. No reasons were given, no explanations offered, and yet the residents complied with a stoic acceptance that belied the oddity of the regulation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a hush fell over Bravo, as if the very air thickened with an unspoken mandate of silence. I had moved to Bravo 3 years ago, seeking refuge from the chaos of a larger city, lured by the promise of peace and order. At first, I was amused by the rule, attributing it to the eccentricities of suburban life. However, as time wore on, I found myself growing accustomed to the quiet evenings, the stillness that enveloped the streets like a comforting shroud. My laughter, once a boisterous part of my personality, was now confined to daylight hours. Life in Bravo was idyllic in its predictability until one evening when the tranquility was shattered. It was an ordinary night in early autumn, the air carrying the crispness of fallen leaves. I was enjoying a book on my porch, the setting sun casting long shadows across the lawn. The distant echo of children playing lingered in the air, a gentle reminder that the day was drawing to a close. As dusk settled, the streetlights flickered on, casting pools of light that punctuated the encroaching darkness. It was then I heard it, a burst of laughter, sharp and clear, piercing the stillness of the night. It was an unexpected sound, jarring in its defiance of the community's silent understanding. I looked up, startled, trying to pinpoint its origin. The laughter came again, a child's giggle, high-pitched and innocent, yet in that moment it felt profoundly wrong. A chill crept along my spine, the shadows around me suddenly deeper, more sinister. The laughter echoed one final time before abruptly ceasing, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. The disturbance rippled through the neighborhood, lights flicked on, windows slid open, and a collective tension filled the air. The residents of Bravo emerged from their homes, gathering in small clusters, their voices hushed and anxious. Whispers of, "Whose child was that?" and "Did you hear it too?" floated through the night. The following day, an emergency meeting was called by the Homeowners Association. We gathered in the community center, a stark building at the heart of Bravo, its walls adorned with framed photographs of past neighborhood events. The room buzzed with a nervous energy, the usual pleasantries forgotten in light of the previous night's disruption. The association president, Mr. Langley, a man whose severe demeanor was only matched by his immaculately pressed suit, took the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying a gravity that commanded attention. "We are here to address the incident from last night, a breach of our community's bylaws that must not be taken lightly." Murmurs of agreement swept through the crowd. I watched as Mr. Langley's eyes scanned the room, his gaze settling on each of us with an intensity that made me shift uncomfortably in my seat. "The laughter heard last night is a reminder of why our rules exist," he continued. "They are not mere suggestions, but safeguards. We must adhere to them to maintain the sanctity of our community." A hand shot up from the back of the room. It was Mrs. Turner, a longtime resident known for her penchant for gossip. "But why?" she asked, her voice quivering with the tremor of fear that had seeped into all of us. "Why is laughter after dark forbidden?" Mr. Langley paused, the silence stretching as he considered his response. "Some rules," he said finally, "are older than any of us. They are rooted in our history, in traditions that are better left unchallenged. With that, the meeting moved on to other matters, the question hanging unanswered in the air. But the unease lingered, a shadow that followed us back to our homes. In the days that followed, Bravo seemed to settle back into its usual rhythm, the disruption of that night slowly fading into memory. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, the ambience of the neighborhood subtly altered. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often, listening for sounds that didn't belong. And in the quiet hours, when the world was asleep, the question of why such a rule existed gnawed at me. Curiosity, as it often does, became a relentless companion. I started to dig deeper, searching for answers in the dusty archives of the local library and the whispered stories of Bravo's elders. I learned that the rule prohibiting laughter after dark wasn't unique to our community. It was a relic from a bygone era, born from a superstition about spirits that thrived on joy, drawn to laughter like moths to a flame. According to legend, these spirits would follow the sound of mirth, seeking to claim those who dared to defy the darkness with their joy. The legend was unsettling, a chilling fable that seemed ridiculous, yet it planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Were we adhering to a mere superstition, or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface of our placid lives? I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching, waiting for another misstep. That feeling of being watched intensified with each passing day. Doors would creak open at odd times, shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of my vision, and the once comforting quiet of my home turned oppressive. The air felt denser, the darkness outside my windows almost palpable, as if it were a living thing pressing against the glass. One evening, as I sat in my living room, the unease peaked. It was a moonless night, the stars obscured by a thick blanket of clouds. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of a lamp casting long shadows that danced along the walls. I was reading, trying to lose myself in the pages of a novel, but my mind kept wandering back to the rule, to that night of laughter. And then I heard it, the faintest of chuckles, drifting through the air like a ghostly whisper. It was so quiet, I almost dismissed it as a figment of my imagination. But there it was again, a soft, eerie giggle that made my skin prickle with fear. My heart pounded in my chest as I rose from my chair, every nerve in my body screaming for caution. I moved to the window, peering into the darkness beyond. The street was deserted, the houses silent and still, their windows darkened against the night. Yet the laughter persisted, growing louder, more insistent, as if whatever was out there knew I was listening. Panic clawed at my mind, a primal terror urging me to retreat, to lock my doors and hide away from whatever lurked in the shadows. But something stronger held me in place, a stubborn refusal to be driven by fear, a need to confront the unseen presence that seemed determined to break me. I stepped outside, the cool air wrapping around me like a shroud. The laughter echoed across the night, a child's voice mingling with the susurrus of the wind. And there, at the edge of my vision, I caught a flicker of movement, a fleeting form slipping between the trees, too quick to be real, yet undeniably there. With a courage I didn't know I possessed, I followed. The darkness closed in around me, the laughter leading me deeper into the heart of Bravo, where the streetlights cast their forlorn glow. I moved through the shadows, my breath coming in sharp gasps, each step a testament to the battle between fear and resolve. As I neared the center of the neighborhood, the laughter ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that bore down on me with an almost physical weight. I stopped, my heart hammering in my chest, as a figure emerged from the shadows, a little girl, her pale face framed by dark curls that hung like a veil around her. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw an ancient sadness, a depth of understanding that no child should possess. She was both ethereal and real, a remnant of a forgotten time, bound to this place by a rule older than the land itself. Why? I whispered, the question escaping before I could stop it. Why must we not laugh? The girl tilted her head. a soft, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. Laughter calls to them, she said, her voice haunting melody that resonated in the stillness. They come when they hear it, seeking joy to steal away. And just like that, she vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness with my thoughts and fears. I returned home, the encounter haunting my every step, the weight of her words etching themselves into my mind. I knew then that Bravo was not just a place of order and tranquility, but a carefully crafted illusion, a sanctuary from the unseen forces that lurked beyond its borders. In the days that followed, the laughter resumed, sporadic and unnerving, as if testing the boundaries of our resolve. The community's tension mounted, a shared anxiety that permeated our interactions, our lives. We spoke less, our conversations clipped and wary, and the sense of being watched intensified, a constant presence at the edge of our awareness. One night, as I lay in bed, the sound resurfaced, soft, persistent, a chorus of giggles that seemed to echo from the very walls of my home. I fought the urge to cover my ears, to block out the sound that threatened to unravel the fragile peace we clung to. But deep down, I knew the truth. We had awakened something, and it would not be easily silenced. The fear lingered, a constant companion in the quiet hours of the night. I found myself unable to laugh, even during the day, the joy of such a simple act tarnished by the knowledge of what it might invite. Graveyard had become a place of unspoken dread, our lives shadowed by the specter of the unknown. In the end, the rule remained unbroken, a silent pact between us and the darkness that loomed beyond. We adhered to it with a renewed fervor, our laughter carefully measured, confined to the safety of daylight. The community continued, its routines unchanged, yet beneath the surface, the fear simmered, a reminder that some rules, no matter how peculiar, were meant to be followed. And so we lived in a delicate balance between order and chaos, our lives dictated by a single, inexplicable decree that kept the unseen at bay. The laughter had ceased, but the fear remained, a lingering shadow that would never fully fade, reminding us of the things that stirred in the night and the fragile peace we had forged in their wake.
The town of EERIE, nestled along the wide plains of South Dakota, was a place that exuded a sense of tranquility. It had the charm of a forgotten postcard, with its dusty roads and wide open skies. The horizon stretched endlessly, a straight line that seemed to hold up the expanse of azure above. Life here was simple and predictable, governed by the soft rhythm of the seasons and the mundane comfort of routine. I had been living in EERIE for a little over a year, having moved from the city in search of solitude and a slower pace of life. My days were spent working at the local library, an old brick building that stood with quiet dignity at the edge of town. The library was rarely busy, the silence only broken by the occasional shuffle of footsteps or the gentle rustle of pages turning. I found solace in this quietude, where the only conversations were those between the words on the pages and my own thoughts. It was a particularly quiet afternoon when the first disturbance came. An elderly man, whose name I later learned was Mr. Henderson, approached me at the checkout desk. His eyes were pale, almost watery, and there was a distant look about him, as if he saw things beyond the tangible world. He was a regular visitor, though he rarely spoke more than a polite greeting. "Have you ever heard the story of the ghoul?" he asked unexpectedly, his voice a soft murmur. I shook my head, intrigued despite myself. "They say it's a spirit that wanders these parts," he continued, leaning closer. "Once you hear its story, it becomes real. It follows you, a shadow you can't shake off." I forced a smile, trying to brush off his words as nothing more than a local legend, yet there was something unsettling about the way he spoke, the intensity in his gaze. He left shortly after, taking with him a collection of poetry, the bell above the library door chiming softly as he departed. That night, as I lay in bed, I could not shake off Mr. Henderson's words. His story lingered in the corners of my mind, creeping in the shadows of my consciousness. I tried to dismiss it, yet a part of me felt an inexplicable curiosity, a tug towards the unknown. Days passed without incident, yet an underlying tension began to weave itself into the fabric of my life. The library, once a sanctuary of peace, now felt different. The silence was no longer comforting, it was oppressive, pressing down on me with an unseen weight. I would catch myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something that wasn't there, but could be. It was late one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the library emptied of its few patrons, that the escalation began. I was shelving books in the history section when I heard it. A whisper, faint and barely discernible. It was as if someone was standing right behind me. Yet when I turned, I found only empty air. My heart quickened, a cold shiver tracing down my spine. I tried to dismiss it as imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by fatigue, or the lingering echoes of Mr. Henderson's tale. But the whisper persisted, and soon it was not just a sound, but a feeling, a presence that seemed to hover at the periphery of my awareness, watching, waiting. Sleep became elusive in the nights that followed. I would lie awake, listening to the creaks of the old house I rented, each sound amplified in the stillness. Shadows seemed to move with a purpose of their own, and the familiar comfort of my home began to twist into something foreign and unsettling. I found myself withdrawing from the world, my work at the library suffering under the weight of my growing paranoia. The townsfolk noticed the change, their concerned glances and whispered conversations filling the spaces I left behind. Only Mr. Henderson seemed unsurprised, his eyes meeting mine with a knowing look whenever our paths crossed. The climax of my ordeal came one stormy night, the wind howling around the eaves of the library as I worked late. The power flickered, casting the room into a dance of shadows. I felt the presence more acutely than ever, a cold breath on my neck, a whisper in the dark that spoke of things I could not understand. In a moment of panicked desperation, I spoke aloud, my voice trembling in the empty room. I asked it what it wanted, why it haunted me, my words swallowed by the oppressive silence. And then, as if in response, the lights went out completely, plunging me into absolute darkness. In that black void, I felt it surround me, a suffocating presence that pressed in from all sides. I stumbled blindly, my heart pounding in my chest, until I found the door and flung it open, dashing into the stormy night. The rain was a cold shock against my skin, but it was real, tangible, and I clung to that reality as I ran through the deserted streets. I don't remember much of that night after I fled the library. The rain blurred the world into a smear of shadow and light, my feet carrying me on instinct, until I found myself at Mr. Henderson's doorstep. He opened the door before I could knock, as if he had been expecting me. His expression was calm, almost resigned. "You heard it, didn't you?" he said softly, and I nodded, unable to form words. He ushered me inside, and together we sat in the dim glow of his living room, the storm outside a distant roar. Mr. Henderson explained that the ghoul was a spirit bound to the town, a manifestation of stories left untold and fears left unspoken. It thrived on the attention, growing stronger with every acknowledgement, every whisper of its name. "Once you hear the story," he said, "you become a part of it. But it's not invincible. Understanding it, confronting it, takes away its power." His words offered a glimmer of hope, a way to reclaim my life from the shadow that had taken hold. That night, in the safety of Mr. Henderson's home, I resolved to confront the ghoul, to peel back the layers of fear and unmask the truth beneath the legend. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in research, combing through the library archives and old town records. I discovered that the story of the ghoul dated back generations, whispered among the locals as a cautionary tale. It was a reminder of the power of stories, of the way they can shape reality when left unchecked. I learned of those who had encountered the ghoul before me, of their struggles and triumphs, and slowly a pattern emerged. Each had faced their own demons, unraveling the threads of their fears until they could stand unafraid in the presence of the spirit. It was a process of introspection, of confronting the darkest corners of the self. With Mr. Henderson's guidance, I began to confront my own fears, the isolation, the silence, the doubts that had long haunted me. It was a painful process, but with each step, I felt the presence of the ghoul recede, its power waning as I took control of my narrative. Finally, the day came when I felt ready to face it one last time. I returned to the library, the place where my ordeal had begun, and stood in the silence of the dimly lit room. I spoke its name aloud, my voice steady and clear, acknowledging its existence, but denying it power over me. There was a moment of stillness, a pause in which the world seemed to hold its breath, and then the presence lifted, leaving behind only the soft rustle of pages and the gentle hum of the world returning to normalcy. The lingering fear, however, remained, a reminder of the power of stories and the hold they can have over us. In Aberage, the tale of the ghoul continued to be told, passed down through generations, each retelling a whisper in the wind. But for me, it was no longer a shadow at my shoulder, but a part of my past. A chapter I had closed. Life in Aberage resumed its gentle rhythm, the days blending into a tapestry of sunlit moments and quiet reflections. I found peace in the ordinary once more, the library a sanctuary of knowledge and comfort. Yet I remained vigilant, aware of the stories we tell and the realities they can shape. For in the end, it is our understanding, our courage to confront the unknown, that allows us to reclaim our lives from the shadows. There are whispers in the small mountain town of Haverhill, where the locals speak in hushed tones about the old forest trail that winds up the side of Thornridge Mountain. They say the trail is haunted by the ghost of a man named Harper, or, as he's more eerily known in the folklore, Harper the Hook. These tales, passed down through generations, are dismissed by most as mere campfire stories, a means to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. Yet, there are those who believe that something more sinister lurks along that path. I first came to Haverhill in search of solace. The city had grown too loud, too insistent with its demands. I longed for the quiet and simplicity that only nature could provide. My new home was a quaint cabin on the outskirts, not far from the infamous forest trail. I often walked the paths, feeling the crunch of leaves underfoot and listening to the rustle of the wind through the trees. The tranquility was a balm for my weary mind. For the first few weeks, nothing peculiar occurred. The forest was just as one would expect, alive with the sounds of chirping birds, the scurry of small creatures, and the occasional crackle of twigs breaking under the weight of unseen wildlife. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could feel the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. I often pondered how such a serene place could be the subject of so many chilling stories. It was on a particularly crisp autumn morning that the first disturbance happened. The leaves had taken on their vibrant hues of orange and red, painting the landscape with fire and warmth. I set off early, the air brisk and invigorating. I followed the familiar trail, meandering deeper into the woods, my mind drifting as I walked. It was then I noticed it. An odd silence that descended abruptly. The forest, usually so full of life, had become unnaturally quiet. The absence of sound was jarring, as if the very air had been sucked away. I paused, looking around, senses heightened. There was a pervasive feeling of being watched, an awareness that prickled at the back of my neck. The sensation was fleeting, but unsettling enough to send me back home with an uneasy feeling in my gut. The disturbances continued over the days that followed. Each time I walked the trail, there were subtle anomalies. Shadows that seemed to shift even when the sun stood still. Branches that bent unnaturally, as if weighed down by something unseen. I began to question my own sanity, wondering if the isolation had begun to play tricks on my mind. It wasn't long before the whispers of Harper the Hook drifted into my consciousness. Though I had initially dismissed them as mere legend, it was impossible to ignore the growing sense of unease that accompanied my every step. The tale, as the locals told it, was of a man wronged, seeking vengeance from beyond the grave. The story said Harper was a woodsman, a solitary figure who lived on the outskirts of town. Known for the large hook he used to carry his tools, he was falsely accused of a crime and met a violent death at the hands of a frenzied mob. They left his body in the woods, and it was there, they say, that his spirit remained, forever haunting the trails he once called home. With each passing day, the forest seemed to tighten its grip around me. It was as though it had a pulse, a heartbeat that synchronized with my own. I found myself drawn to the stories, consumed by a desire to understand the truth behind the legend. My walks became less about escape and more about discovery. Then came the night of the storm. The wind howled through the trees, rain lashing against the windows of my cabin, an angry symphony that kept me awake, tossing and turning as my thoughts spiraled into the depths of the unknown. It was during one of these restless nights that I decided to confront the legend head-on. Armed with a flashlight and a resolve born of desperation, I ventured out into the tempestuous night. The rain was relentless, soaking through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. The trail was slick and treacherous, but I pressed on, driven by an inexplicable force. The further I climbed, the more the forest closed in around me, until I found myself standing in a small clearing, the trees bending ominously in the wind. It was here that I first saw him, a shadow, indistinct but undeniably human, standing just beyond the reach of my light. My heart stuttered in my chest, fear rooting me to the spot. The figure was silent, yet a presence palpable enough to send shivers down my spine. I knew instinctively that it was Harper, or rather, what remained of him. He did not move, did not speak, but the air around him was charged with a heavy, oppressive energy. I felt a surge of emotions that were not my own. Anger, betrayal, sorrow. It was as if the forest itself had become a conduit for his anguish. I realized then that these woods had been his sanctuary too, a place that had seen the worst of humanity and held onto the echoes of the past. The intensity of the encounter overwhelmed me, and without thinking, I scrambled back down the trail, slipping and stumbling in my haste. The storm battered against me, but all I could think of was putting distance between myself and that otherworldly apparition. When I finally reached the safety of my cabin, I collapsed, shivering and breathless. The forest was quiet the next morning, the storm having spent its fury. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground, but the memory of what I'd seen lingered like a chill that refused to dissipate. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Harper was more than a story. Over the next few weeks, I delved into the history of Haverhill, piecing together fragments of truth from the myths and legends. There were inconsistencies, gaps in the narrative that hinted at a cover-up, a miscarriage of justice that had left an indelible mark on the town. The more I learned, the more I understood the anger and pain that permeated the woods. Despite my initial fear, I found myself returning to the trail, each visit less about confrontation and more about connection. In those moments of quiet reflection, I began to speak to Harper, acknowledging his suffering, offering the only solace I could, a promise to uncover the truth and share his story. The townsfolk were wary of my inquiries, their long-held superstitions and fears bubbling to the surface. Yet, there were those who, like me, sensed the need for redemption, a desire to lay the past to rest. Together we unearthed records, testimonies long buried, revealing the true events that led to Harper's demise. It became a mission not just for me, but for the community, a collective effort to right a historical wrong. As the truth emerged, it was as though the forest itself sighed in relief, the lingering tension beginning to ease. The shadows still danced among the trees, but they no longer felt malevolent. Instead, carrying a sense of peace. The legend of Harper the Hook transformed from a tale of terror to one of caution and remembrance. The forest trail, once shrouded in fear, became a place of pilgrimage where people came to pay their respects, to listen and learn from the past. I felt a sense of closure in bringing Harper's story to light, a fulfillment that resonated deeply within me. Yet even with the veil lifted, an undercurrent of mystery remained, a reminder that the forest held secrets well beyond our understanding. I often returned to the clearing where I had first encountered Harper, feeling his presence in the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind. There was a comfort in knowing that I had helped bring him peace, and in doing so, found a measure of my own. In those silent moments, I realized that the fear of the unknown had given way to a respect for the unseen. The forest was alive, not just with the past, but with the promise of the future. As I walked the trails, I no longer felt alone, but rather accompanied by a story that transcended time, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the resilience of the human spirit. And so, Harper the Hook became more than an urban legend. He became a guardian of these woods, a reminder that even in the darkest of tales, there lies a glimmer of hope, waiting to be found by those willing to look beyond the surface. The forest, with all its shadows and light, was a living, breathing testament to that truth, and I felt privileged to be a part of its continuing story. In the quiet, rural expanse of Cartwright County, where the fields stretched endlessly beneath a sky vast and indifferent, life trod a familiar path. The townsfolk were content with the rhythms of nature and the work it demanded. Farms dotting the landscape bustled with activity, their inhabitants rising with the sun and retiring when twilight fell. It was a community knit tightly by kinship, shared history, and tradition. A place where the extraordinary scarcely intruded upon the ordinary. I had lived there all my life, content with my modest existence as a school teacher. My world was simple, a comforting routine of chalk dust, the inquisitive faces of children, and the quietude of my small cottage on the edge of town. Yet even in a town as unremarkable as ours, tales and whispers of the unknown occasionally stirred among us, rippling the placid surface of our reality. Most were dismissed as the fancy of overactive imaginations or passed down as local folklore until the summer of the unnatural horse. It began with a sighting by Old Man Jenks, a character known for his penchant for embellishment. He claimed he saw the horse by the old willow that stood like a sentinel at the boundary of his property. A black stallion, he described, its mane as dark as midnight, eyes gleaming with a strange, unsettling light. Though we humored Old Man Jenks with polite nods and bemused smiles, his story was quickly forgotten. After all, a lone horse was no cause for alarm, but then others began to see it. First, it was young Sarah at the break of dawn as she tended her sheep. Then it was Mr. Thompson, who swore on his late mother's grave that the creature followed him silently through the woods. The sightings grew more frequent, each account laced with a thread of unease that wove itself into the fabric of our daily lives. The horse seemed to appear and vanish at will, never leaving behind any tracks or signs of its passage, as though it were a specter riding the wind. I remained skeptical, attributing these tales to the fervor of gossip and the power of suggestion. Yet there was something about the way people spoke of the horse, an undercurrent of dread too palpable to ignore. I was content to distance myself from the hysteria until one evening when I too encountered the creature. It was late, the sky a tapestry of stars, the air cool and still. I had been grading papers and lost track of time, the candle on my desk flickering low. As I rose to close the window, I saw it, standing at the edge of the woods, its silhouette a shadow against the moonlit backdrop. It was as Old Man Jenks had described, dark, impossibly large, its eyes alight with an intelligence that seemed almost human. I should have felt fear, yet what crept over me was a numbing sense of calm, as though the horse and I were the last two creatures in a world made silent. I couldn't look away, its gaze holding mine with an intensity that bore into my thoughts, unspooling memories I had long buried. In that silence, I felt laid bare, all my secrets known, all my truths exposed. And then, just as silently as it had appeared, the horse was gone. I stood there long after, staring into the darkness, my heart thundering in my chest. The encounter had left me shaken, a disquiet gnawing at the edges of my mind. I tried to make sense of it, but my thoughts slipped like water through my fingers, elusive and ephemeral. In the days that followed, the horse continued to haunt the periphery of our lives. It was seen by more townsfolk, its presence becoming an unspoken specter that loomed over us. Conversations turned to hushed tones, eyes flickering to the window as if expecting to see it peering back. The horse, with its unsettling aura, had embedded itself into our consciousness, altering the very fabric of our community. There were those among us who claimed the horse brought with it a kind of madness. Mr. Thompson's wife started speaking of things from her childhood she had never shared, her eyes wide with an unknown terror. Children woke from dreams, their cries piercing the night air, unable to articulate the images that haunted their sleep. There was a tension, a growing dissonance, as if the town itself held its breath, caught in a spell of anticipation. I found myself drawn to the woods where I had first seen the creature, compelled by a force I couldn't understand. The rational part of me resisted, but the pull was inexorable, a siren call that whispered of revelations just beyond my grasp. I wandered deeper each time, the trees closing in around me, their shadows stretching long and thin. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I saw it again. The horse stood amidst the trees, its eyes fixed upon me. This time, there was no calm, only a profound disquiet that knifed through my core. I felt myself unraveling under its gaze, my thoughts scattering like autumn leaves caught in a tempest. It was as though the horse reached into my mind, twisting and turning until I no longer recognized my own reflections. Desperate to break free, I stumbled back, the forest spinning around me. I heard its hoofbeats echoing, a rhythmic drumming that matched the frantic pace of my heart. The path back seemed unfamiliar, every turn leading me deeper into the woods. I was lost, both in the forest and within myself, until I finally collapsed, exhausted and terrified. When I awoke, the horse was gone, the woods silent, save for the rustling leaves. I lay there, the forest floor cool against my skin, feeling the fractured pieces of my mind slowly settling back into place. But something within me had shifted. A crack had formed, one that whispered of the horse's power and the darkness it harbored. I returned to town changed, my gaze lingering too long on shadows, my thoughts forever haunted by that creature. The townsfolk sensed it, their eyes flickering to mine with unspoken questions. We were all changed, touched by the horse's presence, yet unable to articulate the depths of its influence. It was a curse, a haunting, a reminder of forces beyond our understanding. As the days stretched into weeks, sightings of the horse dwindled, the sense of dread that pervaded the town slowly receding. Yet, the calm was deceptive, a thin veneer that masked the undercurrent of fear that still gripped us. We lived in the shadow of the horse, its memory etched into our hearts and minds, our dreams forever touched by its presence. I often find myself returning to the edge of the woods, standing where I first saw the unnatural horse. I listen for its hoofbeats, for the whisper of its presence carried on the wind. Though it hasn't appeared again, I feel it watching, waiting, its hold on us unbroken. And so Cartwright County carries on, its fields and farms bathed in the golden light of day, the townsfolk going about their lives with a semblance of normalcy. But we all know, deep down, that the horse is still there, lurking in the shadows, a reminder of the thin line between the seen and unseen, the known and the unknowable. It is a lingering fear, an eternal question with no answer, a darkness that echoes in the stillness of the night. The day had begun like any other on Gut Street in Turlock, California. The sun peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the quiet neighborhood, where the houses stood in neat rows, their lawns trimmed and their mailboxes gleaming in the morning light. I walked slowly, sipping my coffee, inhaling the gentle aroma that mingled with the fresh scent of dew on grass. Life seemed to hum with a quiet predictability. I'd lived in Turlock for nearly a decade, a place where, until recently, the most exciting thing to happen was the annual carnival. It arrived each summer, parking its vibrant trailers and erecting its tents in the vast open field at the end of Gut Street. The carnival was a patchwork of color, noise, and laughter, a cherished tradition that everyone looked forward to. It was at one of these carnivals years back that I first encountered him, the Nar, not his real name of course, but a moniker that we came to use, a name whispered with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. In the daylight, the carnival was a place of joy, but at night, it transformed into something else, something eerie, almost supernatural. That's when he appeared, always on the periphery, observing with those piercing eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface of things, into the very essence of a person. It was during one of those languid evenings, as twilight bled into night, that I first felt a disturbance, a subtle ripple in the fabric of normalcy. The carnival was just setting up, and I'd agreed to meet him for an interview, a piece for the local paper. As I approached the sprawling carnival grounds, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. The air held a stillness, a silence that belied the chaos of setting up a fair. Workers bustled about, raising tents and testing rides, yet their movements seemed muted, like a surreal pantomime. He stood near the Ferris wheel, a tall, slender figure silhouetted against the backdrop of the darkening sky. The narc was an enigma, a man of few words but many faces, known for his uncanny ability to blend into any crowd, to disappear and reappear at will. I greeted him with a nod, and he offered a faint smile, although his eyes remained cold, inscrutable. As we settled into the interview, I began with the usual questions: his involvement with the carnival, his role, his history. His answers were sparse, each word carefully chosen. Yet they hinted at a depth of knowledge far beyond his facade. He spoke of the carnival as if it were a living entity, a thing with its own will and purpose. I felt a shiver run through me, an inexplicable chill at the base of my spine. The first real disturbance came when the lights flickered. It was brief, barely noticeable, but enough to disrupt the flow of our conversation. The narc paused, his gaze shifting to the distance, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. I glanced around, seeking the source of the disruption, but saw nothing unusual. The moment passed, and he resumed speaking, yet a tension remained, lingering in the air between us. In the days that followed, the disturbances escalated. Reports of strange occurrences began to circulate. A child claiming to have seen shadows dancing in the moonlight. A dog that refused to go near the carnival grounds. A teenager who swore he heard whispers beneath the music and laughter. Each account was different, yet they all shared a common thread. An underlying unease that began to weave its way into the fabric of our community. I found myself drawn back to the carnival, unable to resist the pull of its mysteries. The narc was always there, always watching, his presence both comforting and unsettling. It was as if he held the answers to the questions that plagued my mind, yet he revealed nothing, offering only cryptic remarks and knowing glances. The Ferris wheel, usually a symbol of joy, now loomed over the grounds like a sentinel, its lights flickering in strange patterns. The climax came on the night of the carnival's grand opening. The air was electric with anticipation, the scent of popcorn and cotton candy mingling with the cool night breeze. Families gathered, children ran about with glee, and the sounds of laughter and music filled the air. Yet beneath the surface, that sense of foreboding remained, an invisible thread that connected us all. As the evening wore on, the disturbances became more pronounced. The lights flickered more frequently, casting odd shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The rides groaned as if under some unseen strain, their usual cheerfulness replaced by a sinister undertone. The crowd, oblivious to the subtle changes, continued to revel in the festivities. Then, without warning, the Ferris wheel ground to a halt. The music stopped, the lights dimmed, and a hushed silence fell over the grounds. Panic rippled through the crowd like a wave, voices rising in confusion and fear. I turned to the narc, seeking answers, but he was gone, vanished into the night as if he had never been there. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of something that should not have been possible. The shadows. Those dancing shadows that had been whispered about were real, and they moved with a purpose, swirling into forms that defied logic. They reached out, tendrils of darkness weaving through the crowd, touching, transforming. In that moment, the carnival was no longer a place of joy. It was a tapestry of terror, a landscape warped by forces beyond comprehension. I stumbled back, heart pounding, mind reeling from the impossible sight. The shadows seemed to seek me out, drawn to my fear, and I fled. Driven by a primal instinct to escape, even as I ran, I felt their touch. A whisper of cold that seeped into my bones, altering something deep within. The world around me blurred, and for a moment I wondered if I was dreaming, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking. Eventually, the panic subsided, the lights returned, and the music resumed, as if nothing had happened. The crowd, shaken but unharmed, gradually dispersed, attributing the events to a technical glitch, a mere quirk of the evening. Yet I knew better. I had seen the truth, witnessed the transformation, felt the darkness within me, and now, weeks later, that feeling lingers, a constant companion in the quiet moments of my life. The carnival has moved on, leaving Gut Street as it was, yet different, changed by the brush with the inexplicable. The narc too has vanished, his presence reduced to a memory, a shadow in the recesses of my mind. But I feel him still. A part of me transformed by that night. I walk the streets of Turlock, the familiar sights now tinged with a subtle disquiet. The world has shifted, and I am a stranger in the place I call home. I see things. Fleeting glimpses of movement in the corners of my vision, whispers that echo in the silence. I try to ignore them, to pretend that life is as it was, but the fear remains. A reminder of the night the carnival revealed its true fate. The transformation is complete, not of my body, but of my mind, my perception. I am changed, and so is Gut Street, forever marked by the presence of the narc and the shadows that danced beneath the carnival lights. And though the world continues to spin, I know that some things cannot be unseen, some experiences cannot be forgotten. The shadows have become my companions, the echoes of that night a refrain in the quiet of my thought. I am left to ponder the nature of reality, the thin veneer that separates the ordinary from the extraordinary, and I wonder what lies beneath, waiting to be discovered in the spaces between the light and dark. The air was thick with anticipation that sunny afternoon as Mr. Fulcrum's Funhouse opened its doors to the public. This traveling carnival was known for its whimsical, yet slightly sinister allure, an ephemeral haven of bright lights and shadowed corners. It had arrived in our small town unannounced, the way such spectacles often did, setting up overnight like a dream unfurling in twilight. As children, we were drawn to it like moths to a flame, our parents half convinced that magic had indeed arrived on our doorstep. I was one among many, a quiet observer, lost in the throng of excited voices and laughter that bounced off the garish facades. The funhouse stood at the center, its structure an elaborate mockery of a Victorian mansion, spiraling towers jutting upward, a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed at odds with the dusky sky. Its doors yawned open, and a sign above in looping golden letters declared, "Welcome to Mr. Fulcrum's Funhouse of Wonders." For weeks, the funhouse was the talk of the town, not just because of its grandeur, but also due to the man behind it, Mr. Fulcrum himself. He was a tall figure with a presence that drew people in, his eyes twinkling with a mischief that dared you to question the boundaries of reality. We all knew someone who had heard someone else say that they had seen him do things that defied explanation. Stories circulated about how he seemed to vanish into thin air only to reappear at another end of the carnival, as if the very folds of reality bent to his whims. The first disturbance occurred during what was supposed to be a mundane Tuesday afternoon. I had returned to the funhouse, my curiosity piqued by the whispers circulating town. There was something unspoken in the air, a quiet dread that seemed to lace every corner of the place. I watched as a group of children, their eyes wide with delight and a dash of fear, ventured into the funhouse, their laughter echoing within its depths. But as the minutes ticked by, only some of them emerged. When I asked about the others, I was met with shrugs and dismissals. "They're probably still inside," someone said. "They'll come out soon enough." But they didn't. Not that day or the next. People began to notice, but no one spoke of it outright. It was as though the air itself was complicit in keeping the truth shrouded in mystery. As the days passed, the funhouse seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The atmosphere grew heavier, as if the ground beneath it was alive, feeding on the nervous energy of its visitors by the aura of illness. I found myself drawn back, unable to resist the pull of its secrets. Each step closer felt like stepping deeper into a waking dream, a place where the laws of nature might easily unravel. The escalation was subtle at first. More children began to disappear, whispered rumors swirling like thick fog. I became obsessed with understanding what lay behind the facade of the funhouse. I spoke to those who had ventured inside and returned, piecing together fragmented memories and half-remembered experiences. They described corridors that twisted in impossible directions, mirrors that reflected not just their images but their nightmares, rooms that seemed to breathe, whispering their deepest fears back at them. My own experience awaited. The funhouse loomed ahead, its vibrant exterior now a sinister beacon. I stepped inside, greeted by an immediate sense of displacement. The air felt different, heavier somehow, charged with an energy that seemed to vibrate through my bones. Each room was a landscape of distortion, walls curved in unnatural arcs, and the ground felt as if it might buckle beneath me. I wandered through, urging myself to keep moving, to uncover the truth that had eluded us all. Within one room, mirrors lined the walls, their surfaces rippling like water. I saw my reflection multiply, each image more distorted than the last until they all seemed to move with a mind of their own. I was caught in a dance with my own shadow, a manifestation of my darkest anxieties. Faces I had known, faces of those who had not returned, appeared behind me, their eyes pleading, mouths open in silent screams. Their presence a haunting reminder of the cost of curiosity. The climax came not with a shout, but an eerie silence. A pause in reality where time itself seemed to hold its breath. In the heart of the funhouse, I found him, Mr. Fulcrum, poised like a grand orchestrator amidst the cacophony of nightmares. He smiled, a gesture that held no warmth, only the cruel satisfaction of a magician whose trick was near completion. Around him, the walls shifted, a carousel of shadows and light. "Welcome," he said, his voice a velvet echo, "to the heart of the mystery." In that instant, I understood. The funhouse was not just a place, but a gateway, a thin veil between our world and another, where dreams and fears took shape. Mr. Fulcrum was its keeper, a weaver of reality and illusion, feeding on the energy, the fear, and the fascination of those drawn inside. I felt a pull, a temptation to give in, to be part of the spectacle, to dwell in the space between dreams, but clarity broke through like a beacon in the fog. I turned, and with every ounce of will, I fled. The corridors closed in, shifting and warping, but I pushed forward, driven by the memory of those lost. I emerged into the night, the cool air a welcome contrast to the oppressive atmosphere I'd left behind. Yet even then, I felt the funhouse watching, its presence a shadow etched into the edges of my awareness. The funhouse, left our town as abruptly as it arrived, a curious void left in its wake. The disappearances were never resolved, the memories of those taken fading into whispered legend. The townsfolk, in an attempt to reclaim normalcy, spoke of it less and less, until it became nothing more than a tale told to frighten children. A cautionary whisper against unchecked curiosity, yet the lingering fear remained, an unspoken acknowledgement that the boundaries of our world are more fragile than we care to admit. I found myself returning to the fairgrounds long after the carnival had disappeared, standing in the spot where the funhouse once loomed. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before the whispers of the carnival returned, drawing in new souls to partake in its dark ballet of fantasy and fear. I moved away eventually, seeking solace in distance, but the shadows of that funhouse followed me, a specter of the unknown and the unseen. Mr. Fulcrum's laugh echoed in my dreams, a reminder that somewhere, just beyond perception, a world of shadows and secrets awaited, with a smiling ringmaster eager for the show to begin anew.